Hi, Ruby.
First, I just want to thank you first for joining tonight, for taking the time to do this interview. I've been wanting to do this for some time now, and we know that a lot of the times, the podcasters and the reporters and interviewers are great to tell our story, but we know that it's usually just a fraction of the story, which is great. But I think that if we if we have the chance to talk about our side of the things that our story, how things have been on our side, what we've been trying to accomplish for the last couple of years. I think if people hear that story, they'll be more apt to kind of to want to be involved, to help, and to bring more awareness to Lisa's case. So that being said, Richard, if you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself. I'm introducing you, Richard. So thank you for joining us. And now tell us if you'd like to tell us a little bit about yourself and um,
Well, I'm glad to be here, and I feel grateful to have a chance to be involved in this case and helping any way that I can. My name is Richard Norgard. I am a retired U.S. Army investigator. I spent 20 years in the Army in the intelligence side of things, uh, but I pretty much spent my whole 20 years doing investigations from different kinds, from espionage investigations. I did a lot of background investigations for security clearances, secret or top secret, and then retired from the Army as a warrant officer. And and then I got a job in Alaska as a private investigator. I went into business with another fellow who was also a retired Army, and so we started up this private investigator business and kind of flying by the seat of our pants. And so we did all kinds of things. We did a lot of surveillance. We did a lot of missing persons cases and what they call skip tracing, that kind of stuff. We did contract work for the state doing criminal defense work. And it was an offshoot of that that led me to end up getting hired by the state of Alaska as a criminal defense investigator. And then I did that for 10 years. And it was while I was doing that that I actually met your brother, Tony Roberson, who was um, uh, had been charged with a crime in Alaska. I won't go into a lot of detail on that. There's really no need to, but it was getting involved in Tony's case that I became aware of Elisa's disappearance. And during that time of preparing for that case, I interviewed you and your mother numerous times. I interviewed many people involved in the case and was involved in trying to locate medical records and just doing a lot of research kinds of things. But basically, I got uh, became very knowledgeable of Elisa's case at that time, and this was sort of in the early to mid 2000s, and and then flash forward from there about about the 20-year anniversary of Elisa's disappearance. You got involved in coming up with a monument for down there, and you traveled down there and did all that. And so I kind of became aware of that. And it was at that time that we discussed um, how the police really weren't doing anything on the case and how the investigation had been made to lapse or allowed to lapse. Um, and that's when you asked me to come on board on a volunteer basis to work on the case, and so that's how that started.
yeah, and a lot of people don't know how far back this goes and how far back our um, our relationship goes in terms of Elisa and Tony.
Yeah.
It's been over 20 years, since we
Yes.
started this. I remember way back when, I remember vividly those conversations talking about, Tony, and it was a really hard time in my life, understandably so. There was a lot going on, and I knew immediately when you heard of Elisa's story, I knew that there was and I know that you're always supposed to keep that line of the separate when you're doing either working for clients or whatnot. There's supposed to be that separation, but I always felt that there was you had become um, very interested, but not just from a point of view of I want to help solve this, but it became personal to you. And I think I knew that you and Tony spoke fondly of you, when we would have our conversations, and um, I could understand how easy it was. You can't with Tony, he's easy to kind of love and take in, and then you kind of adopted us, we kind of adopted you, and it just has been like a roller coaster ride. So that, forever grateful for that time, and for, you being willing to want to help us in that. So, so it sounds like you've had quite a bit of experience when it comes to, investigating cases, investigating, with the state of Alaska, what you did in the Army, as well as your private investigating company at the time. Were there any other any other things that kind of drove you to want to do more, to want to help our family, or anything that you saw on that side, families dealing with these kind of tragedies and traumas?
Sure. Well, yeah, I mean, when you're involved in investigation, and either on the defense side where you have a client who's has the resources of the state sort of massed against them, and basically you and the attorney are all really they have fighting for them. And so you do tend to um, get an attachment to the client or the person you're representing, and in many cases victims. And I would say, to elaborate on what you were saying about my involvement in Tony with Tony, I had many visits with him because the attorney was always involved in writing briefs and going to court and doing that kind of stuff. And so it fell to the investigator typically to go, and we used to say babysit the client, so to speak. But I spent many hours with Tony, and I did get to the point where I felt close to him, almost like he was, a younger brother or something, because he was, number one, he was very um, uh, he had he had a wonderful sense of humor. Um, he he sort of would talk about and I sort of got to feel for what you had gone through as a family. Also talking to you and your mother, documenting the things you had gone through during that time with Ralph and so forth. But from Tony's perspective on what it was like for him, and especially as a younger brother, um, missing his sister, and wanting to help, and of course I found that Tony had a wonderful memory. He he could remember he could remember things that I couldn't remember when I was that age,
Mhm.
but he could remember them. And so he could provide certain details on things that I found to be very helpful. But anyway, after spending all that time talking to him, I sort of felt like I really, knew your family very well, and and even though I hadn't gone through it, I really felt um, I really felt sort of a lot of empathy toward what you had gone through and sort of felt close to your family in that way. So when it came time to wanting to help with this old missing persons case, it was almost like a natural thing to want to say, because I have a certain amount of expertise, how can I help lend my expertise to this effort that you're trying to do? So it was sort of a natural transition.
Yes, and that's something that when we look back, so Tony had a wonderful memory, and there were times that I would sit there and I couldn't believe the things that he was talking about. And so it just he made a great witness, a great, of details that happened at that time. So that was I look back at those fond memories of Tony and growing up, but then also as an adult, us to be able to talk, even though he still had the mentality of an 8-year-old, to be able to share some of those things back and forth. And so
Yeah,
a lot of people don't realize that you are also a friend. You are also a family friend, not just somebody that uh, you know a volunteer investigator. You've been a friend, and you've kind of known our family from the
long time,
worst.
long time.
Yes, a long time, and you've seen us at our you've seen the highs and lows also. And sometimes people will say, well, why has it taken so long? This is one of the things that people have made reference to. Why has it taken um Richard so long? And we turn that around and we say, well, why has it taken law enforcement 35 years, and why are we still at this
Right.
point? So it's
I'd
not
like to,
fair. And there's
yeah.
a lot that's happened in those 35 years. It's not, in the middle of all of this, you have to live your life, right?
Mhm.
This can't consume if you allowed it to consume every moment of your life, you would never be able to live your life. And so there's a lot that happens. In 2010, yes, Aransas, I decided, or not 2010, it was 2009 when we decided to go down to Aransas Pass and put Elisa's memorial. We planted a tree and did her memorial. And I remember at that time talking about just feeling, why has it been so long? And that was 20 years. Now we're at 35 years.
Yeah.
And what were some of the things when you originally started asking questions? I know that you had started talking to some people back in 2010, and was successful talking to some people, trying and you know what did you feel were the challenges back in 2009? And we'll get to 2024, 2016, 2024, and
Right. Right.
2025. But back then, what did you feel? Because you still had some understanding because you had talked to Tony and us, and you had some understanding, but you were still pretty much starting at scratch. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah, I was. And
then.
so, yeah, so what you get a hold of a 20-year-old case, and obviously, um, the first thing you want to do that I tried to do was say, okay, well, what do we know about how this started? What do we, what's the basic information? And so, what we had to go on, we had your testimony, we had your mother's, what Tony remembered, what members remembered, and then we had newspaper reports. So I dug up as many of those as I could find and read all that stuff. Um, I made pretty fairly quickly. I made contact with the police department, um, which would who were not particularly helpful. I made uh, an effort to, well, say, well, can you give me the file? And they said, no, well, no, we can't. You're a civilian. We don't hand out the file to people, and the case is still open, so we just don't do that. And well, you'd have to go to district attorney. So I made contact with the district attorney. There was some back and forth. There was a whole process. And, and finally having convinced the district attorney that with my background, that, well, as long as I didn't share this information with anybody else, they could, give me the file. So, okay, well, that sounded hopeful. So I had to sign some paperwork, do an affidavit. I wrote a letter, and they sent us about 120 pages, which turned out to be heavily redacted. First of all, what they sent us was a very small portion of the file, and it was heavily redacted. And when I say heavily redacted, I mean they basically took out all the names, all the dates, and so what you had is what I like to call basically a doily
Mhm.
of information, where you would have some things people said, but you wouldn't necessarily know who said them. And so essentially, what they gave us was um, almost worthless. It was almost worthless. So, okay, so they're not going to help us. They're not going to help us. I did try to talk to, there was a man who I'm sure you remember at the time, who was said he was affiliated with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, who had relocated to Aransas Pass from somewhere. And and he basically said, I can't tell you anything, because he claimed to be working with the police, and I guess he was he was an ex-cop, and so forth. And so basically, I realized at that point that I wasn't really going to get any cooperation. I was going to have to do this on my own. So I started interviewing people, and I probably from back at that time, I probably interviewed 20, 25 people that were in some way related. There were people that wouldn't talk to me, and I've tried since then to get them to talk to me, and they still won't talk to me. Um, I have talked to people who have told me things, and I don't think they've told me everything. So, um, and then again, of course, the biggest hurdle is you're dealing with something that's, you know, now by this point in time, uh, it's been over 20 years. They, and so memories fade, memories change, our memories. Um, a lot of people think memory is sort of like a tape recorder where you can just sort of play it back at will. It doesn't work that way. Um, things that you read or have been told, or all kinds of outward things that you bring into your brain, all mixed together with all those memories, and get tossed around, and so that they come out differently when you remember them later. Memory is very flawed that way. It's the reason um, that that the number one reason people get falsely convicted is eyewitness testimony, because somebody will swear that they remembered that person did it, and they misremember that that's who it was. And so anyway, so memories are very flawed, so that's a problem.
Mhm.
And then people die. So there are names there were a few names we were able to figure out from the stuff that's, even though the names weren't in the report, based on some of the information in the reports, we could kind of figure out who those people were. But then when I would go back and try to do research online, and through records, to try to identify where they are now and how to get a hold of them, turns out a lot of those people are dead now. So there's all those things. And so when people say, well, why hasn't Richard solved the case? Uh, the police have had 35 years to solve the case. And you know, we have some theories, but theories aren't solutions. So, and the police, we've had to deal with police getting into a mindset about certain things. We've had people, as you and I both know, have actively tried to interfere in our efforts to get to the bottom of this for whatever reason, um, whatever their motives are, who knows? But there's, it's been very frustrating for you more than me, and um, and we've tried, we're trying to get other organizations involved too, to tap their resources, get their help. And so, I continue to hope that the people who, and they know who they are, the people in Heren's Pass who have information about Elisa's movements and who were close to her, I'm still hopeful that those people will get a conscience and come forward and talk to me because I think and I know that they have information that could be helpful, whether they know it or not. And so I'm ever hopeful that they will, come forward. So,
Yes, and thank you, Richard. Thank you for that. And that's what people don't understand, that who don't live in this world that we're living in, right? Um, Solving a case, that a new case, is hard enough with everything you have to deal with. Now you throw in 35 years, and we've talked about this in depth about the memories, and why is it that sometimes I didn't remember that, but then all of a sudden one day, boom, it's there. And how people might say, well, why didn't she mention that before? But they don't understand that you put these memories on a shelf, you put them in a box, and you store it away, because it's just too much sometimes to have to live this every day. And so you put that away, so it's in a safe place. And when you start, it's just like a box in the attic, and you start taking everything out one at a time. Look, every item, then another item is revealed, and then there's another one behind, and another one, and it just starts to flow once you start thinking about it. But when you put it away for so long, it just kind of, you don't know what's there until you start actually talking about it. And between me, you, my mom, um, Mike and Linda Thompson, those memories just kind of started rolling once we started that process. And it was just amazing, all the work that we did, the late night conversations and the texts and the emails back and forth, of how it just, you know,
mhm.
let's look at this now. Let's look at this. Okay, we're on to something. Let's now, this has been an investigation we've been doing together, as a family, as friend, you and I, Linda, we've just all tried to pool our resources together and try to remember everything we could and get as much as we can. So it's just been a small little circle,
Mhm.
you know, and I'm grateful for the people that have been willing to talk to us. I could never understand why people are reluctant to talk about a case. I understand there are fears. I do understand that, but I'd be more than willing to help in a case where, there's someone's missing, and if I had that information. And I understand the hesitancy, people coming to law enforcement, or talking to us. I do understand. But sometimes we just get so stumped, and we have to step back sometimes and just take a break and kind of regroup our senses, and what do we do now? And we've had a lot of good people that have, agencies, and now Project Absentus. They're now on board helping us, and helping to investigate. And they've talked to you. I know they spoke to you last week, and I think they spoke to Mike or Linda. So that's another good place that we can, group that we can utilize to help us in this. So that's great. Okay, so we've got they said about a half an hour so we don't lose our audience. And these are heavy topics. They can take a lot of energy and they can be emotionally and mentally draining. I know they are for me and they probably are for you too, Richard. So we're just going to try to keep it at 30 minutes. So I'm just going to so the next one, I think we can then pick up and talk about maybe some theories and maybe what you're leaning towards or and then maybe what we'll definitely cover 2016. There's a lot to unpack with this. 35 years is a lot. So maybe in the next one we'll talk about theories and go from there. So thank you again, Richard, for doing this. And any final words or thoughts before we
No,
end?
I think it's important. I think it's important that you do these to keep it fresh in people's minds. And you probably have new people joining all the time, and this will be a way for them to get acquainted with the case and your efforts. And so I think it's a good thing.
Yep. I've been wanting to do this for quite some time now. I think this is good because there's just too much to cover, and I think it's an overload sometimes. And so thank you again for being a part of this. And
Welcome.
thanks for all your help and everything you do for us, Richard.
Glad to help.
Okay, well, you have a good night. Thank you again, and we'll pick up next time with our next topic.
Okay.
Okay, bye, Richard.
Bye.